For the first time in years, you're actually crying alone in your room, actually letting yourself feel it for once. The pain is real, it's overwhelming, and for a moment you're allowing yourself to just be in it. And then that voice in your head starts. People are dying in war zones. People have cancer. People are homeless. People are starving. And you're crying about this? You stop crying. You wipe your face. You take a breath and tell yourself, I'm being so dramatic. This isn't even a real problem. Other people have it so much worse. And just like that, you've shut it down. You've invalidated your own pain before anyone else even had the chance to. If this is you, if you find yourself constantly minimizing your own suffering because someone, somewhere has it worse, stay with me. Because today, we're going to talk about why you can't grieve properly, why you've turned suffering into a competition that you always lose, and most importantly, why the idea that someone has it worse is both completely true and completely irrelevant to your healing. Let me show you the pattern you're stuck in, because I need you to see how automatic this has become. Every single time you experience pain, there's this immediate reflex to compare it to something worse, and then use that comparison to invalidate what you're feeling. Your relationship ended, and you're devastated, but you catch yourself. At least it wasn't a marriage. At least there weren't kids involved. At least they didn't cheat on me. At least they didn't die. There's always an at least. You lost your job and you're terrified about money, about your future, about your worth. But the voice says, at least you don't have cancer. At least you're not homeless. At least you live in a country with some safety net. You're burned out, exhausted, barely holding it together, but at least I'm not in poverty. At least I have food. At least I'm not being bombed. Someone you loved died and the grief is crushing you, but at least they lived a long life. At least they didn't suffer. At least I got time with them. Do you see what's happening? You've turned suffering into the Olympics. And here's the thing about the Grief Olympics. You always lose. Because no matter what you're going through, someone somewhere is going through something worse. There's always a worse scenario. Always a more tragic story. Always someone who would trade places with you in a heartbeat. And you use that fact as a weapon against yourself. This creates what I call the suffering hierarchy in your mind. At the top, war, famine, terminal illness, losing a child. These are the legitimate reasons to be in pain. Everything else is ranked below. Your problems, they're near the bottom. Not serious enough, not tragic enough, not worthy of grief. So you don't allow yourself to grieve them. And here's what makes this even more insidious. You don't just do this with big things. You do it with everything. You're lonely. At least I have a few friends. Some people have none. You're disappointed? At least I have opportunities. Some people have nothing. Every single feeling gets immediately compared to a worse scenario and then dismissed as invalid. The result is that you're walking around carrying all this unprocessed pain. You feel it, you just don't let yourself feel it. You acknowledge it exists, you just don't give yourself permission to actually experience it. You're in pain, but you're also simultaneously telling yourself you have no right to be in pain. And that creates this horrible split where you're suffering twice. Once from the actual thing, and once from the guilt and shame of suffering from something you've decided isn't bad enough to justify suffering. So where does this come from? Why do you do this to yourself? Let me break down the 4 main reasons this pattern exists. First, you were taught that pain is relative and comparative, probably from a young age. When you were upset about something as a kid, maybe an adult said, "You think that's bad when I was your age?" Or, "There are children starving in Africa and you're crying about this." Or, "You should be grateful for what you have." The message was clear. Your pain only counts if it ranks high enough on some objective scale of suffering. And since your problems were never as bad as war or famine or death, your pain was never quite legitimate enough. This taught you that suffering is a competition with a threshold, That there's a minimum level of tragedy required before you're allowed to grieve. That if your problem doesn't meet that threshold, you're being ungrateful, dramatic, or weak. So you internalize this idea that you can only deserve to feel bad if what you're going through is objectively bad enough. And since you can always think of something worse, you never meet your own threshold. Second, you're terrified of being seen as dramatic or attention-seeking. We live in a culture that's deeply suspicious of visible suffering, especially if that suffering seems minor compared to what others are going through. You've seen how people react to someone who complains about first-world problems. The eye rolls, the "must be nice to have such easy problems" comments, the accusations of being privileged or spoiled or self-absorbed. You don't want to be that person, so you police yourself. You minimize your pain before anyone else can minimize it for you. Third, there's a weird guilt that comes with struggling when you know you're privileged in other ways. If you have a roof over your head, food in your fridge, people who love you, opportunities available to you, how can you justify being sad? How can you justify struggling when you have so much more than so many people? It feels ungrateful. It feels like you're squandering your advantages, like you should just be happy because look at everything you have. And that guilt makes you feel like you don't have the right to your own pain. Fourth, and this is the sneaky one, invalidating your own pain is a form of control. If you can convince yourself that your pain isn't that bad, then you don't have to fully feel it. You don't have to sit with how much it actually hurts. You don't have to acknowledge how scared or sad or angry or lost you really are. You can keep functioning. You can keep going. You can stay in control, because if you actually let yourself feel the full weight of what you're carrying, you might fall apart. And you can't afford to fall apart. And that feels safer than admitting how not okay you actually are. All of these reasons combine into this pattern where you've essentially outsourced the validation of your own feelings to some imaginary suffering scoreboard. And you will never win that game, ever, because there will always be someone who has it worse. Now let me show you what this pattern actually costs you, because the price is higher than you think. First and most obviously, you never actually process your pain. You feel it, sure. The pain is there, but you don't process it. You don't move through it. You don't let it complete its cycle. Because the moment you start to feel it, you shut it down with, "Other people have it worse," and push it back down. And here's the thing about unprocessed pain. It doesn't go away. It accumulates. It compounds. Every hurt you didn't let yourself feel, every loss you didn't let yourself grieve, every disappointment you told yourself didn't matter, it's all still there. You're carrying years of unprocessed grief that you decided wasn't legitimate enough to feel. Think about it like this. Physical pain tolerance varies from person to person. Something that's a minor annoyance to one person might be excruciating to another. We don't tell people with low pain tolerance that their pain isn't real because someone else could handle it better. We understand that pain is subjective to the person experiencing it. But with emotional pain, we suddenly decide that there's one objective standard, and if your pain doesn't meet it, it's not valid. That's nonsense. Here's the metaphor that helped me understand this. Imagine there's a scale of suffering from 1 to 10. For you, the worst thing you've ever experienced is a 7. For someone else, the worst thing they've experienced is a 10. Does the fact that they've experienced a 10 mean you didn't experience a 7? Does it mean your 7 didn't hurt? Does it mean you should pretend your 7 was actually a 3 because it's not as bad as their 10? No, your 7 is still your 7. It's still the worst you've felt. And you're allowed to acknowledge that. And here's the thing that people miss when they play the "someone has it worse" game. Your healing doesn't take away from someone else's suffering. You being allowed to grieve your 7 doesn't diminish someone else's 10. These are not scarce resources. Compassion is not a pie, where if you take a slice for yourself, there's less for everyone else. You can acknowledge that other people are suffering, and acknowledge that you are also suffering. These are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I'd argue that you can't actually have real compassion for others if you don't have compassion for yourself. If you've trained yourself to invalidate your own pain, you're learning to invalidate pain in general. You're learning that pain below a certain threshold doesn't matter. And that same logic that you use on yourself, you'll eventually use on others. The person who constantly tells themselves, "I have it better than most people," is also the person who will tell someone else, "You have it better than most people," when they're struggling. The airplane oxygen mask principle applies here. You have to put on your own mask before helping others. You have to validate your own pain before you can truly hold space for someone else's. Because if you can't be gentle with your own suffering, you won't actually be able to be gentle with theirs. You'll just be performing compassion while secretly judging whether their pain is bad enough to count, the same way you judge your own. So let me give you the permission you've been denying yourself. And I need you to really hear this. Your pain is valid even if someone has it worse. Read that again. Your pain is valid even if someone has it worse. Your breakup hurts even though divorce exists. Your job loss is scary even though poverty exists. Your burnout is real even though there are people working 3 jobs. Your depression matters even though there are people in war zones. Your grief deserves space even though other people have lost more. Grief doesn't have a minimum threshold. There's no required level of tragedy before you're allowed to feel sad. You don't need to qualify for some cosmic permission slip to acknowledge that you're hurting. Your pain doesn't need to be the worst pain in the world to be real pain that deserves acknowledgement and care. You can acknowledge that other people suffer and allow yourself to suffer. This is not an either-or situation. It's not either I'm suffering or they're suffering, but not both. It's other people are suffering and I am also suffering. The word is and, not but, because but invalidates. I'm struggling but other people have it worse means your struggling doesn't count. I'm struggling and other people also have it worse means both things are true. Both things matter. Here's what I want you to do. The next time you catch yourself doing the comparison thing, the next time that voice says other people have it worse, I want you to respond with this. That's true, and I'm still allowed to feel this. Don't argue with the truth that other people have it worse. That is true, but add the and. Other people have it worse, and my pain is still real. Other people have bigger problems. And I'm still allowed to acknowledge mine. Someone somewhere would trade places with me, and I'm still allowed to struggle with my current situation. Stop playing Grief Olympics. Suffering is not a competition. There's no prize for having it the worst. There's no award for being the most stoic about your pain. There's no nobility in pretending you're fine when you're not. The only thing you win by invalidating your own pain is more pain. What's hard for you is hard for you. What hurts you hurts you. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to compare it. You just need to acknowledge it and let yourself feel it. And when you do this, when you finally give yourself permission to feel your pain without immediately minimizing it, something interesting happens. The pain doesn't destroy you the way you feared it would. It actually becomes more manageable because you're not fighting it anymore. You're not splitting your energy between feeling the pain and telling yourself you shouldn't feel the pain. You can just feel it, process it, and let it move through you. And then it can actually heal. Here's the final thing I want to leave you with. The voice that tells you someone has it worse isn't protecting you. It's not making you stronger or more grateful or more resilient. It's just teaching you that your pain doesn't matter, that your feelings are invalid, that you don't deserve care or compassion or gentleness. And that's not true. You deserve all of those things, not because your suffering is the worst, but because you're a human being who is suffering, and all human suffering deserves acknowledgement. So the next time you're hurting, the next time you're in pain, I want you to try something radical. Don't compare it. Don't minimize it. Don't rank it. Just feel it. Just say this hurts without adding, but other people have it worse. Just let yourself be in pain without having to justify whether the pain is legitimate enough. Just be gentle with yourself the way you would be with anyone else who's hurting. Your pain is real. Your grief is valid. You're allowed to struggle even if someone has it worse. And that's not selfish or dramatic or ungrateful. That's just being human. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.